My guest tonight is Chris Kendall. He is the host of Hoax Busters Call, and he also is the co-host with John Adams of Afternoon Commute. His website is hoaxbusterscall.blogspot.com. Chris, how are you doing tonight?
Good. How are you doing?
Very good. Thanks for coming on the show tonight. Anything you want to add to that intro? Any other details you need to know? Or
Yeah, man, I've never heard of Hoax Busters Call. I don't know what you're talking about. No,
call the
no,
wrong
that's
number.
yeah, yeah, that's correct. Yeah, it's
Okay.
hoaxbusterscall.com.
Now that show, you one thing I like what you do. You feature these phone calls that you make, and you have a very disarming style about. So I think that you get these experts and various opinionated people on various issues, and you corner them on some logical fallacy that they've committed, or some, I guess anomaly or some problem in their story. So it's a
Yeah, it's kind of dealing with the whole uh, fictional nature of authority. I mean, as far as our quote unquote authorities go, and I deal with that quite a bit. I mean, I think a lot of ills in our society are centered around belief in man-made authority, and I think that's more of sort of the central theme of the calls that I do. I I don't really call it a show. I think that's kind of more in the kind of hinting towards entertainment realm. I don't have a problem with anybody like calling what they do show, whatever. I mean, it's just a common convention, you know. But I titled it Hoax Busters Call because it's more centered around sort of a phone call format. It's kind of more like listening in on a phone call than anything. But I do kind of a monologue for a bit on the Hoax Busters Call, and then I take callers, and then it's sort of all kind of centered around the phone call or a conference call or community call type format thing.
And they can listen to those. Just go to Hoax Busters Call blogspot.com and get all that, right?
Yeah, hoaxbusterscall.com or hoaxbusterscall.blogspot.com, either one.
Okay.
Yeah, and then at the top of the blog, there's some links to. I have some YouTube videos, and I have what's called the wall of calls, which is just different phone calls I've made to like public relations people and cops and just all kinds of different people, and engage them in a discussion. And yeah, then there's like the call I made to the water treatment plant about fluoride in the water and confirming that it's industrial waste and all that they're putting in the water.
Now, since they purchased it, it's an additive.
Yeah, it's what is it? Enhancement or whatever. Yeah, like some politically correct name we got to call it. Yeah, but yeah, well, I prefer industrial waste because that's what it is. I mean, I got it confirmed, and then I wanted to, share that with people in case there's any kind of misconception about what exactly it is and what exactly is going on.
So, much of your I've listened to a couple of your recent interviews, and you covered really the topic of Hollywood, mind control, media fakery, and of course the Tinseltown's links to military intelligence and various fake events, so those false rallies that were presented in the mainstream media. I guess how do you want to get in? I guess first, Hollywood. What does Hollywood represent to you? What is Hollywood?
Hollywood, it is more. I think of it. It's a way. I mean, we're all familiar with propaganda. We get these imagery of the Soviet posters or maybe Nazi propaganda or something like that. I think we've went into an age, or maybe this has been around longer than we even are aware of, where propaganda is packaged. If you think about what it is, it's basically a sales pitch. It's the marketing of ideas or concepts, or to shape our perceptions. And I think that Hollywood is probably the best tool for doing that. As far as a propaganda a weapon. I call it. I think our culture is a type of weaponized culture. And then I've read stuff that even the there. I mean, there's this concept, the military concept of weaponizing culture, and um, it is probably the biggest purveyor of loose morals, all kinds of uh, things that get promoted into the culture through Hollywood that are overall detrimental. So you maybe come across sounding like a prude saying that, but it's like no. I think that our values are shaped to a large degree from what comes out of Hollywood and well, television as well, and popular books and radio, music, and culture as a whole. And I think it comes from it's more of a top down. It's not it doesn't come from the people. Well, I mean, I say that with some reservedness because I believe that there are musical forms and things get co-opted. You know.
Yeah, whether it's art imitating life or life imitating art.
Well, then it
Yeah,
becomes both, right?
yeah. But these are, I mean, if you look at Hollywood itself, whether it's the motion picture industry, the various, whether it's MGM or Paramount, um, or any other big studios, Warner Brothers, uh, they represent certain interests, and obviously their artwork or their products going to reflect their interests and their values. And as you mentioned, corralling people into a large hall with the lights are turned down, and the big screen is put before them, and everyone on the screen appears larger than life, and you can manipulate camera angles, and of course, special effects certainly have they've been refined, and as a technique and an art is going to have a profound effect on what one's values, one's outlook on life, and that's been widely known, for decades. Of course, art itself has always been weaponized. That goes back to Plato's Republic, right? I mean,
Yeah.
so it's not nothing new. It's an old, as you said, it's not a new strategy. Um, but when you give examples of this, I mean, obviously, it, Hollywood itself in the 20s, it started out as kind of a very, so we say, you said loose morals in the 20s, and there was a reaction to it. You had the developments, the Legions of Decency in the Catholic Church uh, started organizing itself and putting pressure on Hollywood to to create what they call the Hays Code or the Production Code,
Hmm.
and that stood roughly for about 30 years until the mid 60s. And there's a lot of reasons why that happened. It was you had the demographic shift in the countries, you had the breakup of the urban neighborhoods, and I guess you could say sort of the creation of suburbia, and that led to sort of the weakening of the Catholic Church in the United States, and Hollywood was able to break out of that. I guess out of that, break free from those restrictions. Um, what's interesting is when you get into the psychological warfare angle of this is none of this was really spontaneous. It was part of military planning and social engineering that came out of the War Department and also the foundations. So none of this was really accidental.
Right.
You know.
Yeah, and there's this relationship between intelligence agencies and the Hollywood,
Hmm.
which we've explored quite a bit. You were talking about the conversation that John and myself had with Jay Dyer, delving into the CIA in Hollywood and how there's this integration, that's there, and it gets alluded to, on occasion by people in Hollywood. It's not something that is very overt, but it's there, and I think it goes pretty deep, as Jay suggests with his uh, study into it, and and that also coincides with a lot of stuff that I've ran across looking at different things. And there's some movies out there you can point to that kind of deal more directly with that subject. That there's one that comes to mind as one of a more recent film is the Confessions of a Dangerous Mind. It's about Chuck Barris.
Oh yeah,
Yeah, and that's a pretty interesting film. And I think
there's a George Clooney production, wasn't it?
yeah, George Clooney,
Yeah.
and he's purported to be affiliated with intelligence agencies, and which I don't doubt. I most likely is. And yeah, if you think in terms of culture, weaponized culture, it makes a lot of sense that the CIA would have a high degree of involvement with Hollywood.
Well, even you have statements like people from Ben Affleck have said that, right? CA's
Yeah,
full.
Ben Affleck. That was in a movie Argo,
Yeah.
and that was basically, I think, it pretty much wasn't really concealed too much about it being a CIA production, like have heavy involvement with the CIA consulting on it and everything else. And
Well, I mean, what's interesting about that is, and again, we're talking how far this goes back. I think it predates, at least in the United States, it predates the Second World War, because you have folks like Edward Bernays and Walter Lippmann, but particularly Edward Bernays, who came up with the idea of sort of the idol, the rock idol, and that wasn't rock, but I think with him it was Enrico Caruso, and he's the one that developed the idea of creating a star, whole idea notion of the star is sort of a creation. It wasn't like sort of a spontaneous thing. It dealt with the mass promotion. A lot of this depended on technology. Mass communication really helped in this endeavor. But the notion that you could use the film, the big screen to alter the culture or alter the political circumstances, wasn't really a secret. But people like him, I mean, he kind of, if you look at the career of Edward Bernays, he shows this intersection between entertainment, Hollywood, Madison Avenue, advertising, and also intelligence, right? I mean,
mm-hmm.
and he was, of course, the nephew of Sigmund Freud, so psychology, and and if you look at advertising itself, people like Edward Lansdale, I think came from Madison Avenue. He was an ad man when he went to work for the agency. And of course, he was heavily involved in all types of psychological warfare and black operations. So
Right.
it's the intersections are all there. But Jay Dyer, I believe in Jay Dyer. I mean, I agree with Jay Dyer's analysis. He thinks it's fully integrated, and I think at this
Yeah.
point it is.
Yeah, I think so too.
You have a couple book. Was it the CIA in Hollywood by Tricia Jenkins details that, and there you have a career people like Chase Brandon, who used to be this what they call a liaison officer. But also with the Pentagon, you have also like with the military, where they aid in the production of these movies, but they also, in the transaction there, at least in return for letting them use the equipment, they get to review the scripts of the movies.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah, and we live in this militarized society.
Mm-hmm.
There's a book called The Complex. I, I can't think of the name who the author right off the top of my head, but
Is it Nick Turse?
that's probably correct. I mean,
Yeah, my shelf there. Yeah. There.
okay. So you've
Yeah.
looked at the yeah. I always joke that it could be like a 2-page pamphlet listing all the
Mm-hmm.
corporations that aren't affiliated with the military, and that would have made it a lot shorter. But it's just about every major retailer or corporation that has some sort of pretty large contract with the military, and I think that is part of our such a integrated into our whole culture and society that it's no big stretch of the imagination to come to when you come to the awareness of the media and Hollywood. Not only Hollywood, but the media and the news agencies themselves being integrated into the military, into the intelligence organizations, and all of that makes total sense. And there's legislation and stuff that points to that. They recently they repealed the uh, what was that
Muntac or
the
something?
Smith Munt, was it the
Smith
Smith
Mutt?
Munt?
Yeah. Smith Mutt, you're right. Yeah.
And that was to prohibit the military from directly running psyops on the American population. But I think that another thing I deal with a lot too is law, and I think the concept of law is it's fundamentally flawed. Myself personally, I don't believe that there is such a thing as law as most people conceive it as. It's something that it's like a just merely, I mean, to put it simply as I can, I guess it's still a way to bamboozle people into submission under the auspices of it being some sort of objective standard of uh, the way to conduct yourself, in officialdom or anywhere else. It's just,
Yeah.
but it's just merely an abstraction. It's a fictive construct that doesn't have any bearing in reality.
Oh, clearly,
And
clearly the higher up you go, the political totem pole, the less accountable you are.
yeah, so
Yeah.
I mean, you could point to different court cases
Yeah.
about how the media. I bring this up quite often, where there's these court cases out there that uh, the ruling decision was to the effect, in one particular case, that the media is under no obligation to tell the public the truth,
Yeah.
and that's a court case that's out there. There's another court case dealing with politicians, and they have no obligation to tell people the truth. Uh, there's another court case. I'm sure there's more than one of any one of these, but there's some that I've talked about and listed. The ones with the police have no legal obligation to protect any particular individual,
hmm Which
and there's
begs the
that too.
question, because if
Right?
that's the
Yeah.
case, then why are they afforded any respect or authority if they're not obligated? If they're not the thin blue line,
Yeah. 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 And
as they like to call themselves. Um,
yeah, I once pointed that out to. That's in one of the calls. I think it's one about on the wall of calls where I called uh, a, a police officer that had been involved with the tasering a guy for jaywalking, and I just brought that up to him, and he retorted back with something to the effect that it really doesn't matter. It's like the Supreme Court doesn't affect us or something like that. We're the South Carolina police or whoever they were.
yeah,
The Supreme Court had anything to do with us. So, oh, okay, yeah.
and no, I think there's been a legal case. There's been a specific court case that they're under no special obligation to understand the law.
Yeah, but here's the thing about it, Tim, is the cop was right, and you know how I know he was right? Because he's the guy with a gun.
Yeah. Well, then okay. At least let's be honest about this, then, right?
Right, and that's what I try to do. I try
Yeah.
to just, expose the gun in the room or what have you, the gun under all the paperwork. There's a gun, and it's, that's what it eventually boils down to with all this legal mumbo jumbo.
Yeah.
And then it's no surprise that a lot of these operations, psychological operations that are conducted on the population, aren't actually illegal.
Well, yeah, I know, but it's like, do you really think? I mean, really, we all know what they did with the Downwinders and Manhattan Project, and what they did with the throughout the Cold War with the experimentation, the psychological warfare operations. I mean, MK Ultra and all that stuff.
Well, yeah, I mean, if you think about what the government does as a regular order of business, is that they levy taxes. They call taxes, and so what happens? You don't pay. Eventually it comes down to you being forced into a cage or at essentially gunpoint,
Yeah, yeah.
even though they don't may not necessarily have to point a gun in your face. So they're going to show up with guns, and with the implication that we would definitely will use lethal force to get you to comply. And they call the tax system voluntary, which is totally outrageous. But you
Well, it's
know,
your money or your life. It's voluntary.
yeah. So it shouldn't be any surprise to anybody that this kind of stuff is going on. It's like, okay, yeah, these are the people that rob and steal on a regular basis, and a lot of people don't call it robbery; they call it taxes. But yeah, when it really comes down to it, and if you start asking the right questions, like, well, so this, the Constitution, so-called, is some, document that was what is written down like 200 years ago, and by the powdered wig people, and they made this scribble on parchment, and then that's the law forever. How does that reconcile with logic or reason or anything like that? It doesn't make any damn sense. It's just like a legend surrounding these people, and they were like these profoundly wise individuals. They call them the founding fathers. Doesn't that all just reek of mythology? Of course it does, because
Yeah.
that's what it is.
Of course, they had no authority to draw a new constitution. They were supposed to revise the Articles of Confederation. So that was kind of a coup in and of itself.
Yeah, but then like whatever they wrote down or whatever they purported to represent, how is it a contract that's binding on me or anybody else if I never signed it and my grandfather never signed it? It's like, how is that a binding contract? But the Constitution itself or the Bill of Rights or whatever, it's how does some particular group get to draft up and make laws for a whole nation of people? It's just really, to me, preposterous. I don't know. I guess it makes sense to enough people to keep the system going, but to me, it's when I kind of later now in my life, I've got to really think about it heavily and look at it, some other stuff, and some objections by different people, more eloquent people than myself, that are more knowledgeable than myself about the like Lysander Spooner or something like that, like how he puts it. It's like, yeah, well, that makes a lot more sense than everything I've been taught and told my whole life.
You wrote the Constitution of No Authority, I think, right? Was that his?
Yeah, I had
Yeah.
a Constitution of No Authority, where he goes into the just the basic premise of this idea of a constitution or anything like that. But people would come back with, "Oh, we got to have laws, and we got to have." It's like, yeah, I understand that, but that doesn't mean that we have to have the system like it is now, where you have this centralized authority and all that. It doesn't necessarily follow that would have to be the the way that society goes. It's like, but all cultures everywhere on the earth that ever existed had laws and rules. It's like they didn't have to have powdered wig people to show up and make it for them. They figured it out somehow without Thomas Jefferson and all them cats.
But again, a lot of these notions are fed to us through the media, through the education establishments and the media, and as we get back to Hollywood itself and mind control. From the get-go, you've had the elite. I mean, RKO Pictures, I think, was owned by the Rockefellers, and you have also had even before or not before movies, but even on radio, there's the incident of Mercury Theater with the Orson Welles production of
the
War of the
Worlds,
yeah,
with the Radio Research Project, which included Theodore Adorno and
Hadley Cantrell or something.
Yeah, I think so. Several other people, and then they were studying the effects of the media, this relatively new medium on
mass
population.
psychology. Yeah, mass
psychology, and
And that's a big mass psyop operation.
Yeah, and that it's also referenced several times in the actual War of the Worlds script. The
Hmm.
Princeton University, and uh, so there's kind of references to it throughout that script.
And what's weird is,
And yeah,
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
oh, I was going to say real quick, Adorno admitted in his book about the media that was, uh, you know, totally purposeful. It wasn't an accident that they put that out and then people had a reaction to it like they did.
And it is telling that the data is October 1938. That's on the eve of World War II. And I mean, the whole notion of the cities being destroyed and all this, getting people prepared, for the foreign enemy, whether it's an alien invasion or just the other, and just putting people in this heightened state of alarm would be a common feature of the Cold War.
Yeah, well, that's also a common feature of just the media in general. That's just
Mm-hmm.
to keep people in a constant state of fear.
Mm-hmm.
And I think when you understand what it's about, what it's really about, uh, I think the really beneficial thing about it is that you don't get caught up in it and you don't take it seriously. I mean, just a common sense risk assessment as far as like, what if they were telling you was true about terrorism and stuff? Like, what's the likelihood of you being killed by a terrorist? It's like infinitesimally small.
Mm-hmm.
And it just as a risk factor, it doesn't even register. But that's our politicians and the talking heads on the media and stuff. That's all they talk about. You know.
And well, it's the fear. It was admitted, I think, in the 2003 2004 time frame that the Department of Homeland Security was running those color coded alarms. They were running the
Yeah.
just. It was admitted. The head of Homeland Security at the time admitted that it was done just to raise the alarm bells to affect the election.
Oh yeah. What happened to those, by the way?
Yeah. And I think I read an article that the New York City PD would send cars with would send the sirens off, go rushing down the street
Uh-huh.
just to keep people alarmed. I mean, so I read that. I was like, really? Well, I guess it makes sense if you think about it, because it just, it's
Yeah,
serves
it
their.
makes me wonder too if they don't just do that on the way to the coffee shop or whatever.
Yeah, yeah, I'm sure they. Yeah,
Yeah, I think we've all seen them just speeding without the lights.
yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't think they're supposed to, but
By the way, the Princeton Radio Project was also funded by the Rockefeller Foundation, so
oh, Rockefeller Foundation again. Yeah, yeah.
usual suspect.
Uh huh.
But they were interested, I guess, manipulating the media, the movies. There's also been some talk, even at the radio itself, the megahertz or something. How the way it's received, there's a frequency, they call it frequency or wavelength, that is less disturbing, or at least isn't disturbing. And I think it's the 440 megahertz, if I'm correct, which actually is disturbing to the human body.
Yeah, I think there's, what is it, 432, and then there's 440.
Yeah.
And I think the better one is the 440,
I
or
think
maybe
I
maybe
get
it's
those two
backwards.
mixed up, backwards, but one of the other. But they chose the one that's more disturbing.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I'm sure they had a great reason for doing it. That's, well, it's the noble lie concept, where that's, I think, how government operates.
Mm.
It's like, well, yeah, we're doing this and it looks bad, but it's for your own good. It's some kind of this twisted justification for just about everything. That's what I wanted to go into a lot of this with understanding of that, because I think that's an important thing to understand as far as like motives.
Well, again, yeah, getting this idea of media manipulation. Of course, the movies are a good example of just sheer propaganda. And of course, with the movies, you get visual, you get audio, effects there, and you get language. You get the scenery, camera angles, words, and music. And so they can you pull at the heartstrings, manipulate your emotions, and
Hmm.
that's a form of mind control.
Oh
Um,
yeah, yeah, definitely.
and just the whole creation of the movie star stuff, the image of the movie star, and putting these people up that are little demigods. I think that's was Bernays' idea, which is he was that it would be a remake of the gods that existed in Greek mythology. These gods with foibles.
Hmm. Yeah,
And so that's we can look at celebrities that way, right? They're obviously not perfect, but we worship them, right?
yeah, a lot
Yeah.
like the Greek pantheon, right?
Yeah.
It's like very, very similar, where their conception of gods were these more like human beings than the Christian conception of God, or
Hmm.
even maybe the Islamic conception of God, or yeah, that's really interesting how. Jay, I think went into one of his discussions about Plato's Republic, and how when you have a culture that's kind of centered around a uh, certain concepts, like authority, an authoritative type regime, where it's sort of this everyone defers to the authority of the state, and that leading to this eventual digression into animism and pantheism. And then we've seen that in our culture with
Hmm.
like you're saying, with the Hollywood people being representative types of gods, yeah, and where people put a lot of stock in what they say, and what they do, and how they dress, and how they act, and how they conduct themselves. And you'll see that with these their lifestyles, and how that's always discussed and talked about, and that's we have all kinds of outlets for that information. And yeah, they're like the trendsetters, role models, and even so far as I would say too, like types of gods.
Yeah, it's almost like it's from a standpoint of advertising and promoting consumerism. There's a lot of aspirational messages in these things, like the lifestyles of the rich and famous, right?
Yeah,
um,
yeah, and
and
then
it's gotten more crass lately. I remember when I was a kid, I used to watch a show called This Week in Baseball, and it was a show about what was going on in major leagues that week, and the show centered on playing on the field. Who had a good week, who had a bad week in the highlights, good plays, about the game itself. Well, 20 years later, I'm at the gym and I'm catching a new updated version of this week in baseball. And it's not about what's going on in the field. It's about these players, these 20 something athletes who are making a few million a year, riding on their jet skis and living in their mansions. It's like cribs. What's going on in the crib?
right,
And it's
yeah.
a very different message there for a young person, at least not in my estimation. I mean, enjoying the game, you can innocently watch baseball, but now they're. I'm not too surprised that a 25-year-old who's making 6 million a year, is going to have a big house and have jet skis and have a opulent lifestyle. But for the person watching that, what's that? It's like a lifestyle is rich and famous, you know.
Well, yeah, it's
Yeah.
ties into our whole materialist
Yeah.
consumer culture, and that. And then we have the lottery, which is a lot of people play the lottery. A lot of people go to casinos. A lot of casinos now
Mhm.
that have kind of popped up on the landscape, and it's all about this idea of hitting it rich, and then you get that lifestyle, right? If you hit the
Mhm.
$1 million jackpot or whatever. And yeah, I think that's something that is important for our culture, our society and our culture as it is this this hope hope of something.
Well,
If
that's the game show, right?
yeah, the game show, we'll get on the game show and we'll hit it big, and
Yeah.
we'll win the grand prize, and there's always a chance that that'll happen to you. And It's a way out of the work week drudgery, and it's just a matter of time before you hit that lottery and you break free of all of it. So hang in there, keep working hard, keep your nose to the grindstone,
And don't make waves.
and don't make waves. Definitely don't make waves, because that's not going to help you out uh, in career advancement or anything like that. Don't question anything. The system is pretty tightly integrated with all these control mechanisms that are firmly in place, and it's done in such a way as people don't even people don't really have much awareness of how uh, controlled and restricted they actually are in reality.
Mm-hmm. And how it's been fully integrated is this blurring of what we were used to be told was news and entertainment, infotainment. But one example I've gotten is that whenever have you when you have an impersonation of a politician on Saturday Night Live or something,
Uh-huh.
that becomes news.
Yeah, that's
Used to
pretty
not be the
bizarre.
case, right? I mean, maybe it's a function of the 24-hour news cycle and cable TV and all that stuff, and because people watching TV all the time, that has an effect, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
But that's news itself. It's what's her name from 30 Rock doing Sarah Palin, or such and such doing Hillary Clinton, and then of course the appearance of politicians on these shows. Of course, that goes back to Nixon and Sakatumi on Laugh-In. But it's again, uh, Barack Obama going on Tonight Show or something. These things, we have this blurring of everything. So how do we,
Yeah, blurring of fiction and reality, and even parody with they have the Onion. You've heard of that, where
Oh yeah, yeah.
it's just a spoof news agency that puts out these official sounding news reports and stuff like that. And I mean, there's been several instances where they put something out and people totally take it seriously.
Hmm.
It's because you can't distinguish what is a parody from what is real anymore. So what does that tell you? I mean, it's pretty odd system that we're in when it gets to that point.
Hmm.
You know, uh, that is something that's been an ongoing process. I think even that's getting more and more pronounced is this blurring of the lines between fiction and reality.
Hmm.
But I think that is probably been going on longer than we think. Especially you go back to 1835 with the moon hoax of 1835, and it's not the moon landing. It's the when they discovered bat people and bipedal beavers on the moon. Back to that one, and that was 1835, and that was the um, first example of a mass media news story, because that was the just after the invention of the steam powered printing press,
Hmm.
and that's what they basically led out with, is this outlandish, scientifically sounding story about life on the moon and all the activity going on up there, and how it was all discovered by this preeminent scientist with his fantastic telescope, and he could see all this stuff, and he invented this telescope, so nobody else had one, and yeah, they pushed it for a while, and from what I understand, it's that the the people who are most susceptible to a story like that were people who were educated. They're the ones that bought it hook, line, and sinker.
Hmm.
Uh, People who rejected it were just your common folk that were like, that's a bunch of hooey. Yeah, whatever.
Yeah.
Fat people on the moon. No way. But yeah, it was people in academia, people in the university system, stuff like that, bought into it.
Something's
which
never
is no
changed.
surprise. Yeah, yeah. Same today with these outlandish, cockeyed, scientific quote unquote theories, which aren't scientific. They're just fictional constructs that have
Mm.
this mantle of science wrapped around them, where they're uh, presented as scientific, but they actually are couldn't anything be further from the truth.
What strikes me is how people will be made aware of these things. I guess generally, they're not really. Obviously, the media doesn't promote it, so it's not drilled into their head like other things. But they keep going back to the well, even though they know it's poisoned. I mean, is in the 1970s, of course, we had the church committee hearings, and there was sort of a limited hangout of MK Ultra, some of the abuses of the intelligence community in the preceding decades. But there it was admitted that I think then it was former director William Colby. He actually might have still been the director at the time when he testified, but he admitted that as many as 400 journalists and media personalities were on the payroll of the CIA, and that was under Operation Mockingbird.
Right.
And that dates back to that program dates back to almost to the foundations of the CIA. So from the get-go, they knew they would have to get the newspapers on board. Of course, this isn't anything new. I think, I mean, the lead up to World War II and World War One, there was a manipulation of certain interests of the press. I think there's a speech on the floor of the Senate in 1913-14 about how moneyed interests in New York had bought up all the major newspapers to control the news. So it's nothing new. But you've had I think there's a Frank Wisner who referred to as Mighty Wurlitzer, and that was his ability to play the country like a Wurlitzer organ. And obviously this is going to use media. It's going to use movies, radio, print media, music, as we've come to know, most likely, with the research of people like Dave McGowan and others about how much of the music scene of the '60s was, at the very least, co-opted to promote, or at least to maybe divide and conquer the nation and to promote a certain agenda here at home, particularly maybe marginalize the anti-war effort and sort of create this this dialectic that we get.
Yeah, and I even think it even goes deeper than that. I think the actual war itself was instigated to have the effect that it did with the hippie movement. Anything that was, largely like, Dave McGowan's work. He goes into that, and there's a guy Jan Irving.
Oh yeah,
he went into that, and
Jan Irving's done great research on that. He did
really
both on the Princeton Radio Project and also on the MK Ultra's subprogram 58 with Life magazine. And
definitely. Like, they really cracked that thing wide open as far as the involvement with the CIA into, especially like with integrated in with like people like the Grateful Dead and then the Laurel Canyon scene and all the this hippie movement thing, and how that all was coordinated and orchestrated by intelligence agency, and then all the the people that were prominent in this music scene being like the children of military
to a person,
higher ups, and
almost
stuff.
To a person, almost to a person.
Incredible.
So,
I think the Vietnam War was instigated and created for the hippie movement. Oddly enough, that's the way I see it. Because why the hell are we going to war with?
What's weird about that is you can get a lot of the only thing it wasn't about fighting communism. Let's just say
no.
That's one thing we know it wasn't about.
Yeah. You go to your store and look at labels, you'll see made in Vietnam.
I know.
It's pretty insane.
I mean, obviously you had the opium heroin trade, which you could say that was an effort to push the French out. The CIA nudging the French out of that from the Golden Triangle there. That goes back to China and the Nationalist Army and Burma and things like that. Of course, but with intelligence, particularly CIA, you go back to Yale, Skull and Bones, and the China trade, which was opium, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that legacy there, and of course, all the prominent families in the country were all, whether it's the Forbes, the Delanos, the Whitneys, the Russell Trust, they're all a bunch of opium dealers, right?
Yeah.
So I mean, that's That's the foundation of the American elite, the Boston Brahmin class, the northeastern establishment. But yeah, some people have postulated that the war itself was planned to be some sort of traumatic event to do that very thing. And what's amazing about with Jan Irvin's research with the Life magazine cover promoting psychedelic drugs, and also you have in the 50s the creation of the teenager, right?
Yeah, right.
I mean, before that category did not really exist in people's consciousness. But then I think your partner, John Adams, was talking to Jay Dyer about that, about how this is they have the documents from the advertising firms and corporations talking about how much money they could make if they started appealing to the teenager. But you get this intersection between corporations, because you got to realize the corporations aren't separate from intelligence. It's all integrated because they serve corporations.
Yeah, you always have this revolving door between the private sector and the military and the and also Congress and
Mm-hmm.
oh yeah, so the head of the FDA will be the former head of Monsanto and yeah, and all this other just wild conflict of in your face conflict of interest type situations that are just common, you know.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Well, it's a club, right? We're not in it, uh, but yeah, that whole thing was it almost. What's striking is the amount of forethought and long-term planning that it must have required. Um,
Yeah, I think a lot of this stuff is planned out long range. You know, a lot of the stuff is long range planning that we're looking at. You know,
well,
like
it's almost like the mafia. Like the mafia is intergenerational. It's so why not? Why not the Harrimans, the Rockefellers, the Rothschilds? And
yeah, and then when you control the money system, you'd be pretty
yeah.
confident that you can plan things long term. You know.
What's striking is like you're familiar with Norman Dodd and the Reese Committee hearings and what they discovered.
Yeah, the Reese, was it the foundations?
Yeah, they interviewed this case. I forget what exact foundation they were investigating, but they were looking for communism, but they were they're only going to a certain level because communism itself looks like it was a controlled opposition part of it. But in pursuit of that, they uncovered these things, and what Norman Dodd discovered, he was a chief investigator, but he sent a lady up named Catherine Casey to go through the files or the minutes of the not the Ford Foundation, Rockefeller Foundation. It was the steel magnate. What's his name?
Um,
From Scotland.
Steel magnet. Yeah, I know what you're talking about.
Rockefeller had taken Rockefeller Nash had taken it over by then, but he Carnegie. I'm sorry, Carnegie Foundation for Peace, Institutional Foundation for Peace, or something. Carnegie Foundation for Peace, and these meetings. What she discovered, and she was very skeptical. She said, "Why are investigating these foundations? They're philanthropy. They're involved in philanthropy. They're doing good things." So she was very skeptical, very dubious of the investigation. But when she went up there, whoever was in charge was naively let her see the minutes of these meetings held back in the early part of the 20th century. Like we're talking 1908, 1909. And there's a talk about how do we collectivize the country, how do we fundamentally change the politics and culture of the country. And their conclusion was there is no better way to do it than to subject it to the trauma of war.
Yeah.
And lo and behold, what unfolds in the next 40 years?
Mm-hmm.
So the planning is there. It's very long term.
Yeah, there's a quote too that goes something like, "Who said it? I'm not sure, but you could do more societal change in 5 years of war than you can do in 50 years of peace," or something to that effect. Paraphrase it, yeah.
Mm-hmm. And as if you look at the propaganda, whether it's leading up to, in the run up to World War One, this absurd propaganda with Kaiser, the butcher of Berlin, and Kaiser Germans looking like King Kong. That's another thing is you see the King Kong poster and you see how close it is to like the World War One propaganda posters, and there's also the World War Two propaganda posters regarding the Japanese. So that the artwork is all the same.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it's just amazing. And of course, you have Senator Vandenberg's favorite famous quote to Truman, and when he was proposing the Truman Doctrine, and he said, "Well, Harry, or President, Mr. President, you got to scare the hell out of the American people."
Yeah, and that's what they always do. I
Yeah.
mean, so now we 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 come forward to this day and age where we have all these so-called mass shooting events,
Hmm.
and talked about that quite a bit. How
But this, of course, this involves the issue of Hollywood, psyop, and media fakery, because you couldn't have those without that involvement there. So.
I don't think so. Like one really vivid example that I point out is with the Gabrielle Giffords alleged shooting, which I say alleged shooting. I don't think she was shot. I think she's totally putting on an act. If you go on a YouTuber by the name of Postal Service, it's Paul, like postal instead of postal, Paul,
Okay. Yeah.
named Paul, and he's got some really good videos as far as now. Some of his stuff I don't agree with, but like he'll go into some facial comparisons of some people involved in Sandy Hook, and
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't necessarily agree with him on that stuff. But whatever the case, he's got some really good ones as far as Giffords, and she uses the same lame jokes over and over as part of her impediment. So like these little stumbling on her words and stuff, saying the word uh, yogurt when she means the word yoga, and then her husband comes in and correct her. There was another one I just posted on my blog,
You mean
and she does it several times in
it's not
different
random?
speeches. No, it's not. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
totally
Yeah.
scripted. And there was another good example of this scripting when she gets her paper and she starts to look down at it, and then she starts to hesitate, and then her husband says that, and then she goes, "Oh, okay, thank you, honey." That, and then she starts talking, and she does that, twice, two different occasions,
Hmm.
the same exact, you know, faking of her impediment. Like that is obviously she's playing, pretending to be impaired, from her headshot wound. But yeah, the survival rate, incidentally, of headshot wounds is something like 5%. So if you get a penetrating headshot wound, your likelihood of survival is only like 5%. But you see with these mass shootings, there's always, maybe not always, but there's so many headshot wound survivors. It's just ridiculous. Statistically speaking, these shootings, for one thing, statistically speaking, are absolutely absurd. Like with the body counts and stuff like that, are just astronomically just ridiculous.
Well, this is where Hollywood plays a part, right? Because people watch shootings in Hollywood, everyone gets shot, right? With a pistol.
Yeah, that's what happens in Hollywood.
Yeah.
You got uh, what the Clint Eastwood, the spaghetti western. He busts up on the scene, he starts shooting, and then there's 10, 15, 20 dead bodies when he's done.
Hmm.
It's like, or Schwarzenegger, or any number, action movies and stuff. Yeah, that's how it goes down. Is Schwarzenegger gets hold of a machine gun, and then it's like, okay, he's gonna have a mountain of bodies. But see, that doesn't work that way in real life, because statistically speaking, if you get shot, and you get anybody, look this up, your survival is like, the survival chances of survival getting shot in general is something like 90, 80, 85 to 90% tile
Hmm.
survival rate. And I know a few people that have actually been shot and survived. That's typically what happens. Like the idea that somebody can walk into a room and just lay waste to like 20, 30 people, like in the Virginia Tech 30 something, is just really beyond the pale, statistically speaking.
Hmm.
But then to have multiple instances of this is just totally statistically improbable to the extreme. You can maybe imagine it happening maybe once if somebody got incredibly lucky, but having these multiple instances of this is just not statistically sound whatsoever. That's one thing, these high body counts.
Now, with the Giffords case, wasn't there also an episode of Grey's Anatomy that mirrored the
Yeah, that's why I bring that out as an excellent example because it has this. People refer to it as predictive programming, or foreshadowing, prescripting, or in this television show Grey's Anatomy, it was released like within days of the Gifford shooting.
which is an impossibility to produce that in that time frame. Yeah.
Yeah, so it was already produced way beforehand, and then so they had the shooter in the this particular episode. It was the shooting at a campus, and the shooter, his name was Jaron, and then the shooter in the Gifford thing was Jared. Very similar sounding names. There was a character in the Grey's Anatomy, Arizona, and and then the Gifford shooting allegedly took place in Arizona. The one very striking thing was one of the victims in the Grey's Anatomy had part of her skull shot off, and then what they describe in the Grey's Anatomy is identical to what the procedure they said that Giffords underwent. Reattaching her skull, they had to freeze it, put it in cryogenic storage. Some sort of new experimental type procedure that's kind of halfway experimental, kind of not fully tested yet. And then, but they pulled it out just in the nick of time to save her life. And the same exact scenario was in this.
So you got to ask yourself. I know a lot of people, when you say it's fake, people will say, well, that's crazy. I saw it on the news, so it has to be real. Okay, that's how you want to look at it. Fine, but what are the odds of a major TV show having a show so close to what happened just days before? I mean,
well, the probabilities against that have to be just out of sight, totally off the wall, ridiculously improbable that's going to happen. But see, like on hoaxbusтерscall.com, if you go check that out, I got this link to all these examples of this similar thing. It's called Media Manipulation and Coordination. Why does the news media seem to always get mixed in with fiction? And it's just example after example, and I could make this probably 10 times longer, just stuff I could recall off the top of just different ones that are out there, especially with 9/11 foreshadowing. It's absolutely insane.
There are things that can, like albums from decades before, that are just, you look at, you whoa, like Supertramp, Breakfast in America.
Right. That one is pretty startling when you look at that and you say, man, could that have possibly been accidental? How could that even possibly be? But it's plain as day.
Well, even little things like 9/11. We have 9/11 Twin Towers. It looks like a marketing ploy, right? I mean,
yeah, it's something all kind of put together to stick in your mind, just like a jingle or a meme, or this iconic imagery, the fireballs, the everything about it was very visceral, very iconic, very just in one respect, I think it was like the greatest military promotional piece of all time. As far as the promotion, it's like an ad for the so-called military-industrial complex, like of their validity, of their which absolutely would, if it really did happen, would be an absolute abysmal failure. That's not the way it was portrayed.
Even the official story they go by is an indictment of their $500 billion, or at the time I guess it was $250 billion a year.
Yeah, we're all just a bunch of bumbling idiots that doesn't know our rear end from Jello pudding. But give us more power and give us more money, and we'll solve this new crisis.
That's an old excuse. I remember, if you look back, what's known about Pearl Harbor, and of course the story there was failure to connect the dots. Right? We just we had all this information, just didn't really had nothing to bring it all together. So we need to coordinate all this information. And how do we coordinate it? Well, let's create a central intelligence agency. Well, it turns out they knew exactly what the attack was coming. They'd broken the diplomatic and military.
No, Tim, they didn't because they couldn't talk to each other. Remember,
Yeah,
they couldn't. The FBI and the CIA
yeah.
didn't know what each other was doing, so they couldn't stop the attack.
And so
They couldn't get on the phone or
you get the
anything.
same thing at 9/11. Yeah, George Marshall was out riding his horse or something, and I think FDR was
Yeah,
looking at a stamp collection or something. Couldn't be buying.
yeah. Well, they had the internet too in 1999. They could have fired off maybe an email or something. Hey,
Yeah, and of
please.
course, because then out of this we get what? We get the Department of Homeland Security, and not only do we have a director of Central Intelligence, we have a what's the new position called again?
The
Not
well, there's
coordinator of intelligence. It's director of. Well, it's
yeah,
some
I don't know.
redundant.
Yeah, something
Or
preposterous.
Department of Homeland Security. That word "homeland." Think about that. I mean, it's talk about mind games or mind control with words. I mean, since when do we call it homeland? I mean, I don't call it the homeland. In the media, they call it homeland. What about the homeland? I don't walk around saying, "Oh, what, I love my homeland." But
Yeah.
what are they doing with that? It's almost Germanic.
Yeah, I think they had a very similar
Hmm.
reference to the Third Reich or the Germany and during the Third Reich it
Well, I
was
think the
fatherland or something.
former Stasi director consulted on the creation of Department of Homeland Security. So,
Yeah, it's
yeah.
pretty whacked out stuff. I mean, all around. I mean, the whole thing is just if you look at it, even what you're being told on the surface level, if you were to accept that, it's pretty ridiculous. I mean, but it is all a mind game on not just the American people. I don't even like that term, American people. I don't believe in uh, countries and nations at all. They're just fictions. But whatever the case, the the whole entire planet, is subjected to this psychological operation. And yeah,
Well, you talking the psyops. You talked about some of these rash of shooting events that we seem to be experiencing. It seems to be sort of a 21st century thing, although it goes back to Columbine, um, and of course, a lot of problems with that as well. Um, but why it's being done? It's sort of a psyop thing. There's a lot of agendas that can be promoted with this. One is, of course, the obvious one you can say is gun control, but there's also a more subtle one. One is just basically fear. The other is, of course, the pharmacological agenda here. Sort of the police state agenda here. You can create, the school to prison project where you lock down these schools, treat them like prisons in the name of security, and you can traumatize the kids and teach them how to not to question authority and be monitored by resource officers in schools now they have. Um, uh, but a while back, I talked to the late Dave McGowan about this, and in his book Program to Kill. And what he said was, of course, Program to Kill his theory is that he made all these connections between these various serial killers in the military. Very soon we did Laura Canyon, where these links between military and intelligence to these serial killers. And the phenomenon of the serial killer seemed to develop in the late 60s, early 70s. In the early 70s is when Bill Colby came back to the United States because he ran the Phoenix Project in Vietnam. And
uh-huh.
that was a psychological warfare operation targeting the Vietnamese peasantry, to pacify the country in their terms. And a
Mm-hmm.
lot of that involved going out and in the villages and just mass slaughtering and creating sort of these brutal scenes that you might see in a horror film or something.
Yeah.
And his theory was that a lot of these veterans from the war came home, and the program came home, but you had to be applied differently in the United States. And how do you the phenomenon of the serial killer was a very similar effect of this terrorist, or maybe today's shooter, where it's very random. and your statistics of being a victim of a serial killer were always very small, but it struck terror into the heart of the American people, into the hearts of the American people. And it was one way to support the police state and support fear, law and order, and support more regulation, maybe even get people to just to fear going out. And then if they don't go out, they don't communicate. They don't. You can kind of create an atomized communities don't cohere, and you have a sort of an atomized society. If you look around today, because parents fear for their children, they don't go out and play and explore anymore, take risk. They're stuck in playing video games that are monitored by the Pentagon.
Yeah. It's pretty amazing.
So he kind of developed this whole theory that some of these shooting events is sort of just an application of this trauma that was of a psy war. And if you look at people like Michael Aquino, who was involved in Phoenix, and he wrote, he developed the Pentagon's psychological warfare doctrine. And
right.
he's a devout Satanist.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Well, you point to different examples of people like William Paley was a former psychological operations officer in World War II. Then he's the head of CBS later, and then
and they give us the moon landing, right?
and then during the time of the moon landings, and then it's a former head of or former member of the psychological operations and is head of CBS during all that time. And then the founder of NASA. His resume consisted of being a studio head of Metro Goldwyn Mayer film studios. He had a Hollywood background, and then goes as head of the first head of NASA. What was his name? I'm sure anybody could look that up if they're interested. There's all these different examples of.
And NASA was showbiz. I mean, it was big time showbiz.
Yeah, it is today. It's totally show business. I mean, I talk about that quite a bit. There's actually an excellent. It was a what was it? A book or it was a doc. John Adams sent me of the JPL Jet Propulsion Laboratories in Hollywood, and it just flat out states it right in there. It says that it's talking about the aerospace industry in Southern California, and we've done a series on Southern California, a series of talks. We're kind of going there as this cultural center, and one of the big components of that was the aerospace industry. During the 50s, 60s era. And jet propulsion labs, and then these other industries and the developing, coalescing into like NASA. And in this particular document that he sent me, just pretty openly discusses it as talking about different, methods for creating imagery, computer graphic imagery and stuff like that, developed partially by the aerospace industry in their interest, mainly the military, funding projects, to develop computer-generated imagery. And it talks about in this article how that space exploration had less to do with science than it does entertainment. And its main thrust is, okay, well, how do we, it talks about, how are they making the rockets look, or how do they make it? So the concern was that, it appeals to the masses as far as an entertainment venue, other than a science exploration venue. I just thought that was a really interesting, candid admission there in that article. I need to post that to my blog so people can check that out. But you see this, and then keep in mind too that none of this is illegal. It's all totally, as far as the quote unquote law is concerned. There's nothing that says the media has to tell you the truth. There's nothing that says NASA has to tell you the truth, is there?
No, no, it's
Why do they have to? Why can't they show us imagery and tell us it's in space? You know,
well,
is there
that's
some law
hasn't that
against
been
that?
caught? Like Michael Collins' spacewalk, we now know was faked. He was,
Well, the spacewalks are fake because you see the air bubbles,
mhm.
blub blub. You know,
But that,
scuba diving. It's not. They're not in space. They're underwater in the neutral buoyancy lab, which is openly admitted. They have a
yeah,
giant water pool. I think there's more than one of these, but yeah, look up neutral buoyancy lab, and it's exact replica, and they even say it's an exact replica of the International Space Station underwater in these big, gigantic swimming pools, and for quote unquote training, and they paint them blue screen blue for some reason, and and then you hear these stories. I got a post on my blog that I just recently posted with plankton on the can't say it without laughing. Plankton on the window. Yeah, I got plankton on the window. And then how does that happen? Well, you're underwater. I guess they're pumping in seawater to fill up these giant swimming pools, and yeah, plankton will get in there. There's footage of a squid, swimming around in outer space. That's out there. Uh, sea worm. Like there's God, what was the name? Story Musgrave. That you can look him up. Story Musgrave space snake or something like that, and he's got footage that he says he took on a spacewalk of a space snake floating around in outer space. It's like, no, dude, that's something that got through the filter in in the swimming
yeah.
pool, and it's kind of like an in-your-face joke. They'll plankton and then went, come on, you know. And then a couple of astronauts, is several years ago, it happened where the helmet started flooding, taking on water. And another recent one that happened a couple of months ago with a astronaut almost drowning in his helmet. It's like, well, yeah, they're underwater, they're not in space.
Then you have the famous like golfing on the moon was filmed in a studio. Now we know that's admitted now.
Yeah, what are you going to be doing golfing on the moon? I
That's
mean, that's
This is PR. I mean, it's just like the Doom buggy on the moon, right? What purpose did that serve, other than hey, look, because kids like Doom. It's the early '70s, and kids are into Doom buggies.
well, let's just say, for example, you're going to they're going all the way 250,000 miles to the moon that nobody's ever been to the moon before. All right, So, okay, how just harrowing would that be? Just absolutely, really, it would be actually quite terrifying. I
Yeah,
mean, as far as like, holy crap, if I get even a pinhole in the suit, I'm dead. If I get, if anything happens, like, I mean, there's no way you're going to get rescued. There's no way you're going to get back. I mean, safety and caution would be like number one, right? Number one, like if you want to get back, you don't even know if you can get back. I mean, like this has never been done before. And what are we going to do? Let's play a few rounds of golf, and then hot rod around on the surface in a dune buggy. It's like,
and, apparently they fold that out from a suitcase.
yeah.
Now, where is this? I mean,
Ah, man, I don't know.
we're all familiar with Tang and non-stick pans.
Yeah, where's the suitcase buggy?
The suitcase buggy.
I want one of those.
But again, this is to many people. I think the most, although I think more than they care to admit. I think I talk to people. More people are skeptical than most people believe of. But to say these things, like what? Are you saying they faked the moon landing? That's crazy. Well, why do I asked them? Why do you think they went? And the response again is, well, I saw it on television. So low resolution, by the way.
Well, why? That's a good question, though. Like, why fake the moon landing? Well, I mean, okay, every culture needs a common mythos, a mythology. Their stories that build cohesion among our members. It's this triumph over nature, over triumph of technology, of progress, of science. It's very powerful as a narrative.
Mhm.
And that's why, I think that for that main
especially if you
reason.
consider the politics of the time. All right, the latter stages of the Vietnam War, uh, the the uh, the strife at home, and
Yeah,
it's a great
Kennedy
topic.
assassination.
Yeah, and of course the Kennedy, he's given that speech. We're gonna go there because it's hard or something, right?
Yeah, we go to the moon, and what did he say? This we do this, and then we do that, and then not because it's easy, because it's hard. Yeah,
And the other thing, right?
yeah, this, that, and the other, and then yeah, not because it's easy. I mean, I guess I could take all the paint off my pickup with a small wire brush, not because it's easy, because it's hard. I don't know, like what? Yeah, that is. Well, it's these platitudes we get served up, and then if you want to stop and think about them, they don't make much sense.
You
But
must go by the end of the decade. Why?
yeah, why?
So
And what's the
I mean, if it
point?
had been of July 1970, would the program been a failure as opposed to July 1969? Or
Yeah, right. Just this kind of
whoa, nick of time to get it there, July 1969.
yeah,
Let's
and
do it December 30th.
subsequently right after the production of 2001: Space Odyssey by Stanley Kubrick, which is pretty groundbreaking as far as Hollywood
Oh
film
yeah, the
special effects.
front screen projection, which uh, seems to be used in many of the shots. Another
I think so. Yeah, I think there's a lot to that.
Also, you have other things that Jay Weiner did research on this, and also McGowan's Wagging the Moondoggy series is essential.
Yeah, really good.
Really,
I
I
really
mean,
enjoyed
I
it.
just end up laughing the whole time at his writing style, but it's it's like
Yeah, it's a really good read. He
um,
was a really talented writer.
yeah,
I
his
thought.
style was really low key, but kind of dry, and it just
Yeah,
sucks you
yeah.
in. Um, but they had I think they built like a 50-foot diameter model of the moon.
Yeah, they have all this, and
Then they
where's this
destroyed
at?
then they destroyed it. I mean, where?
Yeah, I had photos of all that somewhere.
Yeah,
I yeah, the mock-up of the moon.
the telemetry tapes that they let rot in like in a abandoned.
Oh, they lost them all. They lost them. They can't find them.
Well, that was the version. Yeah, the high resolution photo or film that they
Hmm.
got. I think what happened was early like 2000 2001. Was it Ron Howard who wanted to? Was it making a movie
Yeah, I had just
about it?
read an article about that. It was like some individuals that were wanted to put it in a digital format, naturally, because that would be the thing to do, right? We want to
We
preserve this. Let's put it in a digital format. And they're saying,
we lost all
yeah,
the
we
footage.
lost all of it. There's like 14,000 cassettes or something. I don't know. It's just so preposterous.
And
But
the
yeah,
camp.
they taped episodes of Magnum PI or something on.
It's like they lost it. I'm like, what? What? And that's when that's when I went, what? That's when I did that. Okay, something's wrong here. Because if I tell you, hey, guess what? I went to Mount Everest. Okay, and I met, and I met the Yeti.
Yeah, and the Dalai Lama
And the
and
Dalai
all that.
Lama says, yeah, we talked, sat down at a campfire, taking pictures. I did. I took like, hundreds of pictures. I lost them all. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I misplaced the SD card.
Yeah. That's even more believable, I guess. I mean,
Well, yeah, I guess actually would be believable. The damn little things. I mean, you could lose them, but like, let's just say you had it on a 8 millimeter film camera with those big reels. It's like, yeah, you don't misplace that. Even two of them, let alone 14,000 of them. I mean, come on.
yeah.
But let's say, oh yeah, well, the bureaucracy and things get shuffled around. But yeah, you notice that. How many people do you know that they've totally lost all their back tax records and then they don't pay taxes anymore because they lost all their records?
Yeah.
I don't know anybody. It's like they keep track of that stuff, man.
Yeah.
But so yeah, they can. Yeah, it's just this idea that yeah, the government's just a bunch of buffoons that
But they can get to the moon on
yeah, they can
first
get to
try.
the moon, and then when we declare war, they can move just about literally move mountains of well, literally move mountains of people, supplies and shit all the way on the other side of the globe without a hitch. I've never heard of a war being announced and then saying, yeah, we just can't get our shit together. We get everything over there except for, towels. So we have to we have to put the war on hold. No, you never hear anything like that. military precision. That's a term for a reason.
Hmm.
That's a well worn term, military precision. I was like, where did that come from? Well, it's military. They get shit done, no doubt, when they want.
So, but again, that's when you mentioned, Stanley Kubrick's alleged or suspected involvement in that. Um, I think the story there is when he was producing Doctor Strangelove, a film which they did not like because it way it lampooned the military-industrial complex, the Pentagon, and all this organized insanity we live under. Um, he had done such a good job in mocking up the bomber, the B-1 bomber.
Yeah, he was, from what I understand, very intensely detail
Mm-hmm.
oriented,
He
and
got it from aviation magazines or something because they wouldn't give him any help.
yeah, and he recreated
Hmm.
the bomber for those scenes, completely recreated it from just getting bits pieces here and there. But they said it was indistinguishable from an actual bomber.
Hmm. But I guess they paid him a visit, and perhaps they made him an offer he couldn't refuse. Uh,
Yeah, I mean
yeah,
that could very well be, and I think that that was probably um, not something that was an afterthought. Like you'll hear that where it's like, oh, well, they finally figured out that the actual moon landing wasn't going to be feasible, so they, as a kind of a last ditch effort, they hired Stanley Kubrick. No, I think the 2001 Space Odyssey, it took Kubrick years to make that, and I think that how this stuff works is that part of the research and development that went into making of that film also went into faking the moon landings.
yeah, and that was the deal.
Yeah, and the budget and everything is all integrated, and that. But see, as years and years before the whole dog and pony show,
Hmm.
the moon landing hoax faked event.
Well, I guess he was able, from that point on, his career, he was able to pretty much produce whatever movie he wanted. So even that deal seemed curious because his movies were never, big uh, money makers. They weren't blockbusters. But he, I think what happened was, at least I don't, I go by the evidence, but I don't know. This is just what I'm looking at. Is again, most people think we went to the moon solely on the basis of what they were told. They've never been given any proof. In fact, when asked to produce evidence to demonstrate the achievement, the government has come up with nothing other than you're nuts.
Oh, right. Oh, okay, so prove we didn't go to the moon. It's like, well, I don't know. Maybe they went to the moon some other
Yeah.
time and some other technology or something. I don't believe it. I just still haven't seen any actual evidence for any of that. Because I think the evidence presented is problematic. Like the astronauts. I don't know what 1/6 gravity looks like. I'll just give you that. I don't
Mhm.
know what that is, supposed to look like. Uh, but I'm pretty confident that it doesn't look identical to dudes dangling from wire. Like you'll see them stumble, and then like the cables hoist them back up, and they're sort of momentarily suspended. Like, okay, 1/6 gravity is not going to permit that. You're either going to be falling or you're not, even
Mhm.
in 1/6 gravity, because you still weigh something.
Yeah.
You're not going to be momentarily suspended. You see that multiple times in a lot of the footage. Now you can propose that 1/6 gravity happens to create phenomena that looks identical to somebody dangling from wires, but I think the Occam's razor, the less presumptions you have to make draw a conclusion, is the better avenue of thought. I think that the reason why it looks exactly like guys dangling from wires is because it is guys dangling from wires.
Well, I look at it this way: is that what's more feasible, technically feasible, given the connections we know between the media, between Hollywood and the Pentagon and intelligence, that they could fake the moon landing or actually achieve the moon landing. I would say faking is probably more technically feasible.
Yeah, and it's very interesting that there's just like this talking point that's out there, which is the opposite of that.
hmm
Like people will argue that it would have been uh, much cheaper to actually go to the moon than to go all to that trouble of faking it,
Which,
which makes no sense. But I'm telling you, that's what people out there are. Well, at least from my experience, that's the argument I've had thrown at me on multiple occasions. Is that, oh yeah, don't you know it'd be? And then I retorted back in a comment online as we was having an exchange back and forth about this, and I said, yeah, well, the movie Jurassic Park, right? Okay, so yeah, it was much easier to actually resurrect a T-Rex out of a piece of, and then do it for real than fake it, because yeah, everybody knows it would be just so much easier to go ahead and just do the science and make dinosaurs and film them, and which was quite and then yeah, I took it even further and said, yeah, the movie Waterworld with what was that at the time the most expensive movie ever made.
yeah.
And I said, well, yeah, they actually flooded the Earth and put everybody in like cryogenic storage
Yeah.
in orbit around the moon or around the Earth, and then drain the Earth and put everybody back, and then restored false memories. And just imagine what it would have cost if they would have had to do it, fake it.
Yeah, a lot of this is the burden of proof is on the skeptics, when really it should be on those who claim to have done it, right?
Well, they're going to point to the footage. They're going to point to the, basically what amounts to an appeal to an authority.
Yeah.
That they're going to point to, well, I mean, look at the footage. I mean, you can go to a museum and look at the lunar module. You can go look at the stuff,
People
the
do, and
uniforms.
they look at it and look, it's made out of tinfoil, and they go, what the?
Yeah, made out of tinfoil, like somebody made in their garage or something, like something like a bunch of, maybe a couple of preteens would get together and come up with an idea. Yeah, we're going to go to the moon, and we're going to do this, that, and the other thing, not because it's easy, because it's hard. And they build a spaceship out of tinfoil and scrap metal and stuff.
It's
It's
like
what it
that
looks like.
short-run TV series late '70s called Salvage One with Andy Griffith. I don't know if you remember that one, where he builds a rocket in his junkyard, goes to the moon.
Andy Griffith, isn't
Yeah.
it?
Oh yeah. Late '70s. Look
No,
it
I
up.
gotta see that, yeah.
Look it up. It's called Salvage One. It's,
Okay, I'll write that down.
yeah, it's,
I gotta see.
he builds her from his junkyard and goes to the moon.
Oh yeah, why not? Well, you see that in films and stuff like that, where there's just example after example where they show you the moon landings being fake, like in the Diamonds Are Forever
Yeah.
Bond movie. There's a scene where he goes into the studio and they're filming the moon landings,
Filming
and he
a,
gets in, yeah, and they're trying to chase them, and they can't stop walking in slow motion. It's pretty funny, but
he drives the space, the
yeah,
lunar, on the desert or something.
yeah, in a high speed chase with the highest security of the base security. I don't know. It's pretty funny, but. And then there's a recent. I watched this movie. My brother was visiting, and his family, and his boy is into this. It's called the Minions, with the yellow midget people and all that.
Oh,
And there's a
is that
scene in there.
Despicable Me or something?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, there's a couple of those been made, and there's I think it's the most recent one they did. And in that film, there's a scene of where they're walking across the soundstage, and in the backdrop, they're faking the moon landings, because it's like supposedly took place during the '60s.
Mm-hmm.
The cartoon scenario, and there's a music video that just came out not too long ago by
Yeah, I
a
saw that.
popular band.
Yeah.
Yeah, with the theme is it has somebody playing the role of Stanley Kubrick in there, and he's upset that they're playing golf and stuff, and he's not liking how they're doing it, and he's the whole thing is, the whole video is on a set with the fake moon landing and all that. Yeah, so multiple examples of that. I guess I refer to that as the revelation of the method,
Mm-hmm.
where you get people get told what's going on, and for whatever reason, I guess I've heard it explain that it's part of this ritualistic thing where if they tell you and you're not paying attention or whatever, it's almost sort of like this. Uh,
Gives them license to do it.
Gives them exactly
There's no
right.
bad karma from that, from anything like that.
Yeah, because we told you,
I
you
told
know.
you, yeah. If you're willing to be duped, we gave you a chance to do something about it. But yeah, it goes back to motive. I tell people when I say, I'm not saying I know. I'm just looking at the evidence, okay? And I haven't seen much evidence. I see a lot of, like you said, I see the video and all this, but there's a lot of questions. It just nothing seems to add up in this thing, and you don't get a resolution. You don't get answers that reconcile your questions. But of course, you mentioned the politics, the propaganda value of it, of course, to the state, the politics of the time. There's also a small matter of some $40 billion that was supposedly spent to put us on the moon, and if you only spend 20 million in this production, you can
Hmm.
make off the other with the change, right?
Right, and then
Which is some
yeah, what
forty
did
billion
they
dollars. So
actually do with the money? Maybe they well, it's probably all kinds of stuff going on that the average person is aware of. Probably, I tend to think a lot of stuff exists underground, literally underground.
yeah, well, this is
Uh,
the black budget. Yeah.
Bases, tunnels. They got things that can tunnel. Oh, incredible digging machines and all that stuff. And it's something that's conspicuously absent. I think they proposed drilling a tunnel somewhere up, I think from LA to San Francisco or something like that to build a train. But there's not really any mention made of like, oh yeah, why don't you just do these tunnels all over the place and make high speed transportation or something there. But yet, I tend to think that already exists. There's definitely legends of that existing, and so no telling what all
Well,
is happening below the ground.
this
Yeah.
goes to the issue of sort of occulted knowledge and secret technology, and of course, people have speculated with after World War II, some of the aviation technology that was taken from the Nazis, the flying saucers and the Foo Fighters, and this was implemented into the maybe the aircraft, and this explains some of the UFO phenomena where these ships seem to act in ways that are far beyond what we understand our aircraft to operate. Of course, this assumes that we know what's in their inventory.
Yeah. If you
No.
take a frisbee and you throw it, it's really aerodynamic.
Mm.
It's really a good platform. It would seem for traveling through the atmosphere,
Hmm.
like a disc shape, kind of cuts through. It's kind of like one continuous wing, almost like it can. Um, with the computer controls and everything to stabilize it and everything
Hmm.
like that. Is that something that is far better design than uh, the plane aircraft as we know it, and that's something that's just been suppressed, over all these years. And then we've had all this conditioning to associate that with Space Brothers,
Yeah, and of
Uh,
course we have these boondoggles like the F-35 that just cost so much and they can't get it off the ground.
yeah, yeah, like but I tend to think that there's all kinds of so-called suppressed technologies that exist. Yeah, I don't know why there wouldn't be. Uh, you know, I think flying saucers are real, but they're not from outer space. I don't know why they would have to be.
Yeah.
If you think about it, like, yeah, you could pull up the they had one in the Canadian Air Force. There's footage of that where they're flying around on a flying disc and some other stuff that's out there. But yeah, but when we see a disc flying through the air, it's automatically associated with outer space or something,
Well,
something from outer space, space visitors, space brothers, or whatever.
that meme's been put out there too, maybe for that very reason. I mean, that's.
Yeah, I tend to think so.
I mean, have you seen the movie, the documentary, Mirage Men.
Oh yeah, yeah. I've
Yeah.
talked about that a
So it's
couple
openly
times.
admitted that they manipulate and they lead people down blind alleys. I mean,
Yeah, I tend to
you know,
think that that's largely accurate. To what degree, I don't know, but I think that's pretty much how it went down. Yeah, they would take people who are, into looking into this stuff. They get led down a certain
yeah.
rabbit trail, and then they start getting their heads pumped full of nonsense by these intelligence operatives.
And that's a great way. I mean, it's a huge time sink, and there's only so much oxygen in the room. So you're gonna take a sort of a cohort of people who are skeptical, maybe have certain investigative skills, and send them down that blind alley. And like the old saying goes, if you can get people asking the wrong question, you don't have to worry about the answer. And
Yeah,
you
that's a
know,
good point. Yeah, and then it goes back to this belief in authority and authority figures. Like, oh yeah, the intelligence agencies wouldn't lie to me, would they?
oh, I like when they say, "Well, they have documents."
And they have documents.
Well, you did hear a document leak? I mean,
Yeah, document leak. Oh, it got
Eisenhower with
leaked.
aliens in
Yeah,
1957. It's in that document. Don't you see? He played golf with them. You know,
yeah. And of course, we all knew they were hiding something. So
is it?
yeah, yeah. It's pretty funny as far as how easily we're manipulated. And it has to do, I think, primarily is belief in authority.
That and fear of peer. I mean, I think peer pressure plays a big deal in that because we have certain vanities at certain stages in our lives, and if we get somewhat educated and we get a little older, we don't want to be thought of as a fool. And
Yeah, that's a big one. Yeah.
a lot of people. I mean, they just want to go along and get along. They want to be taken seriously. You don't want to be thought of as a nut. Um, and so if you start raising these questions, just asking questions. That's nothing. Just I'm not saying I know. I'm just asking the questions. Explain this to me.
Yeah, and you got taught not to do that in school. You don't ask those kind. You don't ask questions like that.
you know, so it's one of those things where again, that's the whole mind control agenda. There, you get people, afraid to think, afraid to talk. So they can't look at these things with a clear head. And that's all part of the trauma, because that's the first thing that when you have a traumatic experience, you lose your critical faculty shut off because you have the fear and the flight sets in.
Well, like brought this up talking about the Santa Barbara shooting with the reporters breaking into
Yeah,
the apartment of the alleged shooters and rummaging through their personal belongings and stuff
and
when it
supposedly,
was
yeah,
yeah, and it was supposedly a crime scene.
yeah,
And I thought about how absolutely beyond the pale that was as far as something that is not going to happen in reality. Because you think any of those script readers are going to risk being brought up on charges or anything for corrupting a crime scene or anything like that? And then there was like people who were pointing out the fact that, yeah, they obviously no indication in there that they had dusted the place for prints. It was actually just a stage prop.
yeah.
But you ask yourself, like, okay, why are they giving you this preposterous scenario? I mean, don't because just exactly what you just got through saying is because the timing of it, I think, is important too. It's like within days of the quote unquote event, when it's still fresh in people's minds, when their emotions are high and their critical thinking is turned off. But they needed to communicate as an important part of the narrative that these terrorists can be anybody. I mean, they're very normal appearing. They had Christmas presents for the baby and
A
bags. They
nursing
were,
mother can be a terrorist.
yeah, she was. They had a young infant. They had all the baby clothes, just like your neighbors. And then they show a picture, like they turn to the nightstand. There's a Quran
Yeah.
there. So it's everything is there, like the whole tableau is all kind of just neatly laid out, and yeah, to communicate all of this stuff to you and do it in a memorable way, and also lend to this idea that these intrepid reporters are out there
Yeah.
digging the truth. Is like, get out of here with this. It was just so I couldn't take it. I was just so um, incensed about the whole thing. I was just utterly blown away by it. But it's just how how ridiculous is that? I mean, it's just nonsense, total, absolute nonsense.
And yeah, it's what's strange about that is just recently you have this whole Apple computer conflict with the Department of Justice, FBI, regarding I guess encryption on phones because they want to use the phone, be able to get in and get full access to the phone immediately if there's an incident or something. And this is part of the. I think, is that part of the San Bernardino investigation?
Yeah, I actually the other day, or no, it was yesterday. I picked up a newspaper. I opened it up, just thumbing through it. I was waiting on somebody, and I happened to open to that article that's talking about that. Yeah, and
But that's supporting the narrative as if this is like as this is a genuine event. When that ridiculous situation when they went into the alleged perpetrator's home with the mob went in there and started rifling through this crime scene. That shows the fraudulent nature of this event. Yeah, it's still being that's just down the memory hole. No one even talks about that anymore.
yeah. Well, I mean, that's obviously not a real scenario
Yeah,
by any stretch of the imagination. I mean, well, for one thing, I think the obvious thing is that I mean that you could get brought up on serious charges if you contaminate a crime scene. For one thing, there's no way in hell the reporters are going to do that, especially as a group like that. Get out of here! I mean, just totally
mm-hmm.
nonsensical. Um, the yeah, and then I did a video. It's at the hoaxbusterscall.com. There's a YouTube link at the top, and it's titled "Warning: Graphic Content."
Oh, that's the one with Halo and the
Yeah, with
yeah.
the simulated hyper realistic war training drills, and pointing out a couple of different things like this organization called Craft International,
Mm-hmm.
that Chris Kyle, remember him? And
Yes,
then they did a movie about him and all this other nonsense. And
he was killed just before the Boston bombing, right?
killed just before the Boston bombing, and that played in the gun control narrative thing. He was killed by one of his former uh, Marine buddies or whatever.
And
Was he a
Kraft
Marine? I don't know.
International was identified at the scene, the Boston bombing.
Yeah, Craft International was at the scene of the Boston bombing. Craft International was also at the scene of the San Bernardino
Mm-hmm.
uh, shootings. And yeah, an interesting thing about Craft International is that they themselves specialize in this hyper realistic war training with pyrotechnics and all that stuff. And if you do a comparison of those pyrotechnics that they use in this hyper realistic training, and then look at the explosion in Boston, and it's like virtually
Yeah,
identical.
yeah. The video shows where they shows these graphic training scene exercises in Boston bombing. And I think one gentleman in that video quotes, "It's Halo Corporation is founded in the Hollywood scenario. We create situations founded in the Hollywood scenario." But that video shows us just how I guess it shows us the practicality of a staged event. Now
Well,
they,
yeah, I
yeah,
mean, can I prove that nobody was injured in the Boston thing or anything like that? I think there's just so much circumstantial evidence that you come to an unavoidable conclusion that, for one thing, there was a drill. There's testimony, eyewitness testimony to that fact. There's also Twitter postings put out by the officials saying that there's going to be a bomb at 600 Boylston Street, where the bomb went off just before the bomb went off. It's only a drill. They announced it over the intercom. It's only a drill. It's only a drill. The drill that they were conducting was a scenario of like terrorists with backpacks, and very much what they said happened for real. Uh, Boston, you have like people who claim to have like dislocated ankles, and then there's footage of them running up and down the street.
mm-hmm.
Like but their purported injuries is a dislocated. There's one footage of one lady that was allegedly injured on her right foot, but she's there's footage of her walking with her crutches on the wrong side of her body and she's a heavy set woman, and there's no way in hell she would be taking any weight off of that injured foot. She'd be actually putting weight on that foot the way she was
Hmm.
holding her crutches. But um, yeah, the hyper realistic training, and I intersplice the Boston bombing with all the military on the scene and all that with this hyper realistic training, and also the San Bernardino alleged shooting, and intersperse that scenery with the hyper realistic training. And yeah, one thing I wanted to touch on while we're talking about this is something I touched on earlier in the conversation about the quote unquote noble lie, the noble lie concept of like, because I think this is hard for some people to get past. Like, how would our officials be tied up in something like this? And here's one thing about that. With that said, I don't think that the majority of the police that are involved with it are even have to be necessarily in on it per se, because of course people could shooting blanks or whatever they're doing have to be in on it.
Hmm.
They know it's some kind of a training scenario, but they keep quiet about it when it's portrayed on the media as real, and they go along with it and they acquiesce with it. They have to, because you have to either come to different conclusions about all this. Either the police and the military and the authorities are actually mass murdering people, which I don't think is true, um, or this is all real and it's really happening, which I think they've pointed out a lot of things that make it statistically highly improbable, unlikely, and of course with the foreshadowing and the fictional accounts. Another example is this series Mr. Robot that came out with a plot line where two reporters are murdered, and that was like a week before it was scheduled to be released a week before the WDBJ shootings with reporters getting shot,
Hmm.
and that's another example. But so you taking all this circumstantial evidence into account and asking yourself, could this stuff could Giffords possibly have had her head blown open to reflect what exactly happened in the Grey's Anatomy? You ask yourself, is that even likely? And then back to what I was originally saying about the noble lie and why these officials maybe participate in something like this. Um, I I should have added this to that video, but I didn't. But it was a scene from Wag the Dog where, have you seen that movie?
Hmm.
So they're in the restaurant, um, and the main character, played by Robert De Niro, is talking to the CIA guy.
Yeah,
And
William Macy or something. Yeah.
yeah, William Macy is the CIA guy in this film, and then they're having this dialogue back and forth. And the CIA guy is telling this, whoever this Robert De Niro character represents, but the guy who's kind of conducting this. If somebody's not familiar with that movie, it's about a fake war that's done Hollywood style, with full Hollywood producer and everything, played by Dustin Hoffman, and then
Whose name's Stanley, by the way.
Stanley, somebody, yeah, a big Hollywood producer is what he's portrayed in this movie, and they invent a war to distract from the president, his involvement with like an underage girl, and then that supposedly played itself out in real life, not necessarily an underage girl, but with an intern with Monica
Hmm.
Lewinsky and the whole thing with
Even
and then the Sarajevo conflict and all that.
even the photograph, by the way,
And the photograph, yeah, even down to the, like I've talked about this
the
with the
beret,
detail, the beret,
which is predates the scandal, which meaning that
yeah,
whoever's
by
ever,
years, because it had to have been
yeah,
scripted and then put in production for years prior to all that.
which draws that whole Lewinsky thing was that a diversion from like Mena, Arkansas, and Bush cocaine connection and all that stuff. I mean, the whole
I probably was more just general diversion, distraction. Exactly what it all involved, probably multiple things, I
yeah.
would guess. Yeah, whatever was going on in Sarajevo and all that, with all that, I don't know.
Because the whole you get the whole Clinton crime family, and there, of course, he was in league with Bush and with Aaron Contra and Oliver North, and that's a whole other story that really hasn't been told with Mena, Arkansas. But you also have the Clinton. Clinton was the guy who drove Haley Boggs to the airport, to his ill-fated trip to Alaska. By the way, do you know that, Bill Clinton?
Where Hale Boggs
Yeah,
crashed in Alaska,
yeah.
and yeah, doesn't his son Nick Begich, right?
Yeah, his
Is that
Baglich was his father was on the plane too. By the way, Baglich. Yeah, he was a congressman, I believe.
right? He was on the plane too
Yeah,
that crashed. Yeah,
but
and,
he was a critic of the Warren Commission
oh, okay.
finding. But Bill Clinton is the one that was tasked to drive him to the airport that day.
Oh, really? Okay.
So, you know,
Yeah, so there's this scene in that film, and they're having this discussion about, okay, why, because the CIA guy's asking Conrad Breen, I think is his name in the film. Hey, there's no war. We got satellites and we see, and there's no war going on. And he comes back with, well, if your satellites aren't showing a war, what good are they? And then goes into how, like, this is all beneficial to you, CIA guy, and this is all, I think one thing in that piece of dialogue I think is important, and that's what I wanted to point out, is when he says that, okay, we live in this day and age of, Muslim terrorism and all this, that at any time, it's like it's just a matter of time for one of them gets a hold of a suitcase nuke and brings it into the United States and sets it off. We need to do all this fakery in order to, gear up to get get the military budgets going, to do all this stuff, and so that we can prevent it from actually happening. We got to do it. We got to fake it so it doesn't happen for real. Which is a very twisted piece of logic.
yes.
But when you think about it, with all these mass shootings and stuff like that, there is somewhere some kind of a twisted justification, a noble lie, or something that gets like all these Sandy Hook people that were pretending to be the parents of the victim and all that stuff, and like what's going through their mind, why are they doing this? And then of course, not to go off into Sandy Hook, but they have actors reels, especially these high profile ones, especially like Francine Wheeler that did the president's address and all that. They're actors.
They're actors, professional.
Her husband's an actor. They have acting reels. You can go look them up.
And she has some sort of like weird like children's shows. She's dancing around and all that.
Yeah, she's some performer for children's programming and all that.
Yeah.
And but okay, it's totally justified in these people's minds because whatever it is that's going through their mind as far as what's going to be the outcome of faking these events or doing this stuff is like, oh well, we're doing good, we're doing this whopper of a lie, we're putting it out there, but it's okay. We actually live in a society that's totally fine with lying as long as it's for a good cause, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's how generally I think people think. It's like, it's quite okay to lie. See, we're taught this too in our media and our Hollywood films, our television shows.
We have a cryptography. A whole intelligence community is based on deceit and lies, right?
Yeah, but let's just say you have a real good reason for lying. Let's say you really are a firm believer in gun control, for instance,
mm-hmm.
and you want a world where there's no guns, and you see that as some feasible possible scenario in the future. And there's definitely a lot of people out there that we know that are totally in line with that idea, like, oh, if we could just get rid of every gun and then we wouldn't have this bad things happening, people
mm-hmm.
would hurt each other and stuff. We just need to get rid of this inanimate object that's out there. Yeah, so the noble lie, we do it, we fake it so that we can prevent future tragedies. We fake a tragedy to prevent a tragedy. See?
Well, I guess
and
that's
the police do it, and the officials do it.
I guess that you could say it's a slight improvement for actually pulling off a tragedy.
Yeah, just pulling off a tragedy to prevent a real one from happening. Like 9/11. I think that was the big one. It's like so. I am of the school of thought that, quite possibly uh, the whole entire list of victims was contrived and fake in different ways.
Hmm.
I think there is a percentage. I don't know how big of a percentage, but I do believe there's a percentage that were actual people that were there with their, associates and friends and maybe even family members to some degree or another. And then, one day they're here, then 9/11 happens and they're gone.
Yeah.
Now, did they go into something that's similar to a witness protection program thing? I don't know. Maybe they actually were trapped in the towers and crushed, but I don't know. I wasn't there. I can't say that I know for sure, but I tend to think that there was a high degree of Hollywood style fakery in the 9/11 event. But yeah, what would the justification for doing something like that massive and then having enough people involved? Because you'd have to have some people involved. I don't think that all the firefighters and all the people have to be have full knowledge of what's happening, because most of the people, I think the majority of people could be totally in the dark and be right there on the scene,
Yeah. Yeah.
totally in the dark what's going on, but be right there looking at it. Because what are they looking at? They're looking at smoke coming out of a hole in a building. And so how many people have to be totally aware of what is going on? Not that many people would have to be, but the ones that do would certainly, there have to be some. Like, especially higher up in the departments.
And of course, the as far as the witnesses go, the vast majority of the country, the world, indeed the world, experienced 9/11 through the medium of television, which shouldn't be reassuring in what we were seeing necessarily what was happening to some degree or another. There's some degree of manipulation.
Yeah,
So
and then we think about how big of a shot in the arm was 9/11 to the military establishment,
mhm.
the intelligence community. We're talking about thousands of people that is their livelihood, that is their bread and butter, that is their reason for existence. You're talking about all these career people, career military people, career intelligence operatives, all these people that benefited tremendously from 9/11. They absolutely were the beneficiaries of that. Of Think about trying to come up with a justification for, let's say you're an insider that knows the whole thing was a complete Hollywood production, fakery involved, and to keep that quiet, knowing that, okay, your livelihood is at stake. We did it for a good reason. Whether or not people got killed, I tend to think maybe people didn't get killed. I don't know, or maybe some people did get killed, but some of the people involved weren't even let in on that. I don't know. I have
Mhm.
no idea. But I can sit here and think up of this very plausible rationale for doing not only 9/11, but Sandy Hook, Boston bombing, uh, Charleston shooting, San Bernardino, Aurora, on and on.
Well,
Uh,
it's psychological warfare.
Psychological
Yeah.
warfare. And then you have to invoke the scenario where you have the United States military are conducting deliberate psychological warfare on the American people. Well, uh, yeah, and it's a lie. It's a preposterous lie. It's a flagrant lie. It's ethically uh, unconscionable. It's immoral. But well, think about, though, if you're lying for a good cause, though, which is what, if you look at the intelligence agency, you look at the military and stuff like that, that is definitely part of their playbook.
Yeah.
Lying for a good cause. Well, we lie to save people. We lie to do this. We lie to do that. The first casualty of war is the truth. Everybody knows that. You got to lie. You got to tell lies. Lies save lives. Loose lips sink ships. All this other platitudes you get thrown out there, and it's like, yeah, that it totally fits that culture. Totally fits that the military mindset. to do these types of operations, to have enough people involved that would keep absolutely quiet about it, that in their mind it's completely justified. It actually serves their whole livelihood, and it is like what Eisenhower warned us about: the beware of the military-industrial complex,
Hmm.
which I think was, whether or not that's his scripted talking point or whatever, it doesn't matter. He was putting that out there, and I think that has shaped and molded our existence as Americans, quote unquote, for the last however many years. The whole military industrial complex is so absolutely entrenched, and continues to expand and get bigger, and especially after 9/11.
Hmm. Well, yeah, they're faced with a dilemma there because with the end of the Cold War, they had lost their reason for existing.
Right.
And so what are we going to do? We got to create a new enemy. Of course, and the name of the new enemy emerges from the old conflict, at least according to the official narrative, right? Al Qaeda out of the Mujahideen in Afghanistan.
Yeah, and then
Yeah.
think about when Wag the Dog came out, right
Mhm.
around that time period in the 90s, when after the Berlin Wall fell, supposedly, and all that nonsense, and that represented the end of the Cold War, and then we're going into this new era, and we needed a new boogeyman, and we needed a new rationale, a new narrative, and that was pretty neatly summarized in that one bit of dialogue, I think,
Yeah,
in that movie.
and of course, going to World War II, our erstwhile allies, Stalin's Russia, became the new enemy.
Yeah.
So
And
uh,
again, with the revelation of the method, so they're telling us what's happening, what's going to happen, and even the the rationale given for those on a certain strata of society, your career, military, or career, or anyone that's in entrenched into the government apparatus.
yeah, and of course, you get these formalized bureaucracies that do the bidding of this deviant elite that previously had to act informally. But I think when you had, probably end of World War One, you had the formation of the Council of Foreign Relations and the Royal Institute of International Affairs, the sort of Anglo-American combine. They got together, I think, and pretty much, I don't, writing the script is probably too strong of a word, but obviously they were able to at least set the agenda and take control of events, if not manipulate them for their own purposes. But yeah, definitely. I mean, you can. It's just an ongoing thing with the Cold War and all that. Um,
Yeah,
yeah.
we've always had this looming threat.
Hmm.
You can go back anywhere. We've always been in a continual, constant state of war. We've always, from what I understand, been under the so-called War Powers Act, um, which is something I've pointed out a couple of times. It's, yeah, you have these rights and you have these freedoms that are explained to you in their glorious Constitution, but yeah, if we get threatened, all bets are off, and it's like out the window.
Yeah. So obviously their incentive is to create a threat so they can ignore the Constitution.
Yeah, and there's been threats going back to the time of the so-called founding fathers,
Yeah.
and they threw people in prison with no trial or
Oh,
anything
from the get
because they
go.
represented, yeah, right from the
And
get-go.
the ink wasn't even dry yet. And
Yeah, the ink wasn't even dry on the damn
Alien
thing, and they
Sedition
were already
Acts.
violating. Aliens is exactly the
Yeah.
Aliens and
And
Seditions
then you have
Act.
with World War One, for the first time, American boys are being drafted to fight a foreign war, and there's resistance to it. There's a lawsuit, and what does the Supreme Court say? Well, because Germany does it, we can do it. That's basically the logic of their saying. Well, we're a state, states draft, even though the Constitution says that it explicitly prohibits involuntary servitude.
Yeah,
It's
well,
not
that's
involuntary servitude; it's the draft.
put put in the con and Constitution, right?
Yeah.
Uh,
So
and,
anytime they're confronted with a roadblock, they just resort to some sort of legal sophistry to push it aside.
oh well, yeah, that's all it's ever been.
Yeah.
It's just sophistry and word salad, and yeah, I think I do an okay job illustrating that when I make phone calls to people and trying to get at the crux of the matter with, well, I had one discussion with a lady cop, and um, she was featured in a video online where a guy was trying to go into a public building and bring his camera, and lady cop was there, and the sheriff, and they were just informing him that, yeah, you can't do that in here. And so I, called her up on the phone and just asked her, it's like, okay, is that a law, or what exactly are you doing when you're telling somebody that they can't do this or that?
Mm-hmm.
Didn't matter. It was a camera, whatever it happens to be. It was just the idea that this quote unquote law enforcement officer is telling you what you can't do. And that's pretty much the thrust of it. It's
Yeah.
like she's telling you something that you can't do, but you ask her, it's like, okay, is there a law? Is there some law somewhere that says I can't bring a camera into your building? She said no. I said, well, what are you telling anybody that they can't film there?
Yeah.
Well, we have a policy. I said, how is that? Is that the same as a law? I asked her, I said, can you be charged under your policy criminally by a policy? Well, she said, well, no. I said, well, what are you doing then? Like, what is a policy? It's something that you just draft up, and then has the same. Well, it absolutely does. But it was very interesting how the conversation. Well, to me, it was. Maybe some people won't be, but it's very interesting what she said. She says that we will ask you, or we ask the gentleman we ask him. Now that's very important, because she's wordsmithing. She's playing semantics here, word games. They all do. That if they're any kind of status in law enforcement, they're adept at this to some degree or another. And she said, if we ask you and then if you don't comply, we'll escort you from the building. That means that they'll initiate
Force.
Yeah. And then she said, now, if he resists or something like that, then there'll be a problem. So I said, okay, so what you're doing is you're initiating force. And then if I were to resist your force, that's the charge I'll be charged with, is resisting or disorderly conduct or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
They're creating the situation. But see how it's like this, knowing that there's no law that you can be charged with, but going through this routine where they can initiate force against you, which is absolutely wrong.
Yeah,
totally wrong. But but in her mind, that's how things operate. That's how it works. Like, no, you don't have to do what we say, but we're going to initiate force on you, which she didn't call it force. She said, we'll escort you out of the building. But see what I'm saying? It's like she immediately launched into that. She didn't have to think about it.
Mm-hmm.
She knew what she was talking about. She knew. And then, when I called her out about it, she resorted back to, well, I don't have the law in front of me, implying she didn't say there was a law. She just said she didn't have it in front of her. And I said, well, okay, yeah, that's really not what I'm after. I'm not after chapter and verse. I'm just asking, like, oh, is there a law? She never did come out and say expressly that there was. Mm-hmm. Just, you have to pay attention and read between the lines when you're dealing with these people. And I think it's very interesting, but some people might not find it interesting at all, because I think what most people do is they see the badge, they see the uniform, and they say jump, and you say how high.
Yeah.
That's it.
And the problem with that is they want to go home that day for dinner. They don't get arrested or get beat up.
You don't want to go to jail. You don't want to get shot. So on that level, it's very sound.
Yes.
That's why I told her on the phone, I said, yeah, I'm not going to be coming in your building, lady. I said, I prefer just like it is now, where we're like 5 states away. Mm-hmm. This is how I like to deal with cops. We got a lot of land distance in between us.
Well, so totally unfortunately, if we lived in a system that at least respected some sort of law, rule of law, at least with how they think of it, is when an officer is clearly in violation of his oath of office, or is not acting under the law, he should be held personally responsible, and they're not, and that's where you get this abuse.
Well, like there was a in Oklahoma. There was a cop that was brought up on multiple rape charges, and then they were questioning one of the young women that was testifying, and then she said, "Well, why didn't you call anybody or tell anybody?" And she said, "What police are you going to call on the police?"
Yeah.
That's what her words were. It's like, yeah, what police are you going to call on the police? There isn't any. But how long did he do that? He probably did that for years and years. I think what happens is they get carried away. They can get away with cops can get away with just about anything, but they can't. They have to rein them in at a certain point.
Yeah.
I think they get away with drunk driving. They get away with all kinds of stuff, but there's limits. So they can't be just total jackasses about it. They can't go around raping women at will and stuff like that.
Unless they're checking for drugs.
Yeah, maybe that's what he was doing, right? So
I was checking for drugs.
yeah, checking for drugs. I was using another appendage to get it. Well, I didn't want to get graphic, but yeah.
So,
Well, it's like, but like, what is a reasonable search and seizure? Or like, well, define reasonable, right? Who gets to define that?
yeah.
Like Supreme Court, right? But even if whatever the Supreme Court decides, just like I talked to that cop on the phone, he says the Supreme Court, that had nothing to do with me. I'm in North Carolina or whatever. I said, yeah, okay, buddy. Yeah, I mean, it's like, yeah, he's right. It's like they do pretty much what they want to an extent, and if you don't like it, take them to court.
And who can afford to do that?
Well, who can afford to do that, and then who can stand up to all the stonewalling and the stuff that you're going to be confronted with? So yeah, there is no law.
Yeah.
I mean, just plain and simple, there is no such thing as law. There's only authority, and that's why. I mean, I wrote an article and had a listener send me another write-up that was kind of took the idea I was going on about in my post, and he wrote up. Kind of one was a bit more fleshed out, kind of touched on some more issues, and that's on Hoax Busters Call .com and some older posts. But here's the thing: it's like the idea of a government conspiracy. Well, government conspiracies, in one perspective, aren't possible because there is no law, right? So there is no law to violate. There's only authority.
Mm-hmm.
In reality, there is only such a thing as an authority. There is no law because they don't follow their own laws. So if there was law, they would have to follow it too, right? And they would be diligent in enforcing it on each other, which they absolutely do not. So there is no law. There's only authority. So if you're above the law, which the quote unquote authorities clearly are above the law, and just not only in those few examples we touched on, but many, many, many more, where they're totally above the law. They don't have to apply any of the laws, codes, restrictions, codes, or anything to themselves that they enforce on everybody else. And then the populace, pretty much at large, is totally accepting of that circumstances for the most part. They don't have that big of a problem with it. It's okay because they're authorities, right? Or else they would be totally outraged and want to do something about it. But generally, people don't. So there is no law. There's only authority. So if you're above the law, you can't break a law. If you can't break a law, you can't be involved with a conspiracy because a conspiracy is something that's classified under law. If you talk about it in that aspect, so there really is government conspiracies for the average dupe, I would call them out there, is not even possible because you can't be involved in a conspiracy if you're not capable of breaking a law for the fact that you're an authority and you're above the law.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, and so that was titled Why Government Conspiracies Are Impossible.
Well, yeah, they operate in that, I guess you say that nether world.
Yeah, they definitely don't apply the laws to themselves. And matter of fact, the law, as far as like these, like we talked about the psychological operations, if people are talking about, well, we need to expose this so we can bring these rat things to justice in the courts. It's like,
Yeah.
No, man, it's not even against the law. I mean, you can the Fox News is categorized under entertainment. It's like entertainment. It's like what do you expect?
Hmm.
It's like you can look it up yourself. It's entertainment. There's no truth there. There's no truth to be had. There's nothing that they're going to tell you that doesn't serve somebody's interest, and it's not going to be your interest.
Hmm.
It's going to be the paymaster's interest, and that's who they serve, obviously.
Yeah, and of course the FBI building is still named after J. Edgar Hoover, despite all the crimes we know he committed now, right? You
Uh, yeah, so you
know,
don't even,
it's
you
the part.
can't disqualify yourself. See, there you go, because he was an authority, so he's still respected as an authority even to this day, no matter how many laws he broke, right?
Mhm. Compromised. He was he broke the law.
Yeah, I mean, the list of laws that he violated probably would fill another law library.
Oh yeah, because his whole file system it was obtained illegally, yeah, for the most part, and so he also used to frequent his mob-owned racetracks with his boyfriend, so
Yeah,
Clyde Dolson. So
just flagrant lawbreaker, and but still has a big government building named after
yeah,
him. That should tell you something.
yes, maybe they're being honest. So, so
Yeah, in the kind of offhanded way that they do with their, so-called revelation of the method there.
yep. Well, Chris, I had you a long time tonight. I want to thank you for spending so much time with me tonight to talk about all these various topics, things you cover on your show so eloquently and so completely over the years. Anything else you want to say tonight, or?
Well, I characterize all this as a overall positive message. I mean, some people may not take it that way. They think, "Oh, this is depressing. We didn't go to the moon." It's like, well, why do you really honestly care? We went to the moon or not? I mean, come on. But okay, the shootings are fake, and this 9/11 thing wasn't. Maybe there's a possibility that no one actually died. I don't know. I wasn't there, like I said, but I'm pretty certain that not as many people died if they did die as they said. I don't think people are getting shot up in these shootings. I think it's a positive thing to be aware of the level of how you're. I don't call it reality because it's not reality. It never has been reality, but we can choose to accept it as reality or we choose to reject it. But we didn't get to go into the nuke thing. Maybe some other time we can, but
Oh yeah, that's a whole nother.
I think that's a good relieving thing knowing that there isn't like a bomb somewhere that could blow up an entire city. But okay, what if it can or can't or whatever? I don't believe they exist. I don't believe there's good evidence that they do exist. The footage is dubious to the extreme.
Footage is. I grant you that because that it just doesn't look real, and you can interpret that in many different ways. And like I said, a lot of these other things is it's it's a wonderful psyop, the idea of the super weapon, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's to induce fear and loathing, and an unsettled, a queasy population that's just kind of like it has that as another
Duck
thing
and
hanging
cover.
over our heads.
Duck and cover. Don't ask any questions.
Yeah, duck and cover, all that stuff. And it's just clearly, when you look at it through that lens, it's like clearly put out there to keep people in a state of fear. Now they're talking about, oh, it's just a matter of time for, of course, the terrorists get a hold of a suitcase nuke and bring it into Chicago or something. They keep referencing that.
Yeah.
But, I mean, when I hear that, I just, like, shrug my shoulders. I don't believe nukes. I certainly don't believe a suitcase nuke exists. If nukes exist, then, well, for one thing, how do you get all that explosive power over such a small amount of material? I think that whole idea is just really, really fanciful and pretty absurd. But and it goes to all this theoretical physics and all this stuff, that's another whole nother subject.
Well, you have to go understand what the Manhattan Project was, and it's all this top secret stuff. And most of us, again, only know these things prescriptively. We're told. So,
Well,
I
yeah,
mean,
given imagery
Yeah.
and how does Tim, what a nuke looks like, going on, exploding nuke looks like? Well, how do we know other than what we're given as far as this footage? So, like, what is that? I mean, what are we looking at? Do we even know? Well, it's all, you have to make an appeal to authority. You have
Hmm.
to believe that what they told us about this thing was true. And of course, somebody could point out, oh, there was all these eyewitnesses. Oh, they had all these demonstrations and all this stuff. Well, they also had big giant mountains of TNT that they would detonate as part of their tests. Like, why do you need to do that if you're testing the bomb or all that? But yeah, that's all out there too.
Hmm.
Are you looking at TNT or are you looking at a nuke? Well, I'm not an expert. I got to appeal to an authority, right, to tell me what I'm looking at. But yeah, I got a piece of footage. If you go to my YouTube channel, hoaxbusterscall.com, you can look at it. It's Nukes Don't Exist as a title. That piece of footage, I think, is undeniably fake. I don't know how you explain it. Part of the explosion stays static, and there's
Yeah, the
another
clouds and everything. Yeah.
yeah, the clouds are unperturbed, and also the part of the mushroom cloud is uh, forming around a static part of the explosion. In other words, like over several frames, there's a part of the explosion that stays perfectly motionless
Yeah,
and
to the corner
static.
there, the kind of darker area just stays the same. Yeah.
And that can't
Yeah.
be real explosion. It just can't. And I don't. What kind of film anomaly could you chalk it up to, or something like that? As far as I'm concerned, that is just as fake as anything can be, and there's no other rational explanation for it except for, you got to remember that this is made in Lookout Mountain, a full production Hollywood style film studio owned and controlled by the Air Force, and that's where all that footage came out of. And they admittedly hired Hollywood special effects people. So if you kind of add those two things together, I think a clear picture emerges of total scam and fakery.
Hmm.
But yeah, I think that's another good thing to know, that there isn't a big giant scary bomb that's going to kill us all. It's just, it takes a lot of the, well, we all got to live in this thing called modern civilization. I think it takes a lot of the pressure off. When you say,
Oh yeah, I was reading an article by Miles Mathis about the Bikini Atoll nuclear tests, and he says, so what does this faking indicate? He talks about he scrutinizes the photographs, and there are anomalies which are hard to explain, to say the least. I would so what does this faking indicate? I would say that indicates one of two things: either the entire nuclear program has been faked to keep your ass under the desk, ducked and covered, or the nuclear program is real, but our military didn't wish to cause this amount of real destruction on our lovely home planet Earth. Those who are familiar with the scruples of the military wouldn't bet on the second possibility, seeming to leave us with the first. However, the second possibility may have a variation. Perhaps the military wasn't allowed to run these tests. That implies someone or something which has the power to disallow the military from doing things, which leads us into other problems. I will leave that problem unsolved for now, only giving us a pointer, which is this: either someone behind our own government is more benevolent than we think, or someone behind the Russian government is more benevolent and powerful than we think, or the apparent benevolence we see here come from some hidden third party. Whatever explanation you choose to embrace should give you a surge of hope. It goes back to your message. Things may be bad, but they may not be quite as bad as the story we have been sold. The fact that our government has long been faking so many events gives you no reason to trust them, but it beats the hell out of the events being real. Given
yeah,
the choice of an honest government and terrible real events, or a dishonest government and terrible fake events, I will take the second any day. So,
that's very well put. Yeah, I like a lot of what Miles Mathis
so
puts out.
food for
Yeah,
thought. I mean,
yeah,
just
yeah, it's
label this
good.
under food for thought. And like you said, we're looking at the evidence, and yeah, and again, it just you know,
And it's circumstantial evidence,
yeah.
meaning, well, I mean, they could compile circumstantial evidence against anybody and throw you in prison for life.
Hmm.
So, I mean, circumstantial evidence is very compelling when it starts to really, really, really pile up.
Yeah.
And but is it absolute proof? Do I have some kind of absolute proof that nukes don't exist, or absolute proof that man didn't go to the moon? How do you prove such a thing?
Hmm.
Well, yeah, like you said, the burden of proof is not upon me. It's not upon you. It's upon the one making the claim.
Hmm.
And their evidence is seriously flawed to the extreme, So, and it just doesn't add up.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm trying to say.
Why develop atomic test films at Lookout Mountain? That's I think yes. Obviously, they were looking to manipulate for some reason, at least those images. So
Why do you need
yeah.
Hollywood people, which don't come cheap, when you could train somebody to operate a camera, which the military trains everybody for everything else,
Hmm.
but they can't train somebody to operate a camera under these very specialized circumstances? You're filming a nuclear bomb that's unprecedented. What would Hollywood have to do with that? Why would they have any special insight to all the technicalities involved with the very special set of circumstances known as a nuclear
Hmm.
blast? Well, it makes sense in light of hiring the best people that are proven to be the best people whose primary jobs are creating illusions and fictional worlds that don't actually exist. Fictional, 50 story tall genies, like in the movie that came out in the 40s
Yeah.
with the Thief of Baghdad, which I think a lot of the explosions you see that are purported to be nuclear are most likely like real dynamite explosions that have been enlarged through film forgery, fakery.
Yeah, and
Which, yeah,
some apparent layering going on there too. Yeah.
yeah, and I'm not saying that's every explosion that you see is done the same way, because I think they use different methodologies for different effects. Because you see, there's like a lot of different looking explosions too. Like some of them look like this orb that's sort of spreading out. Looks like something that was concocted in a lab or something like that. And it's
Hmm.
like, well, maybe they used something else. I don't know. But with the like the video I point out on my YouTube channel, it's like that is obviously fake, unless you want to try to invoke some kind of quantum physics time warp or something, where part of the explosion stays frozen in some sort of time tunnel or something. I don't know.
Okay. Well, now
Like, what would
yeah.
you say to that? It's like, I mean, but Occam's razor again, with the simplest explanation that doesn't invoke as many uh, it's wacky scenarios like
Yeah.
quantum foam or something like that. It's like probably the most plausible, probably the most reasonable, and then you factored in with the fact that Hollywood people worked on it, and that's why.
Might be indication it's fake. Hollywood people worked on it. That's interesting. Yeah. So.
Yeah, that's what I think anyway. But
Oh.
yeah, who am I though? I'm not an expert.
So anyway, so listen, Chris, thanks again. Again, that is Chris from Hoax Busters Call. That's Hoax Busters Call, blogspot.com or hoaxbusterscall.com. He also does Afternoon Commute with John Adams. And you can just go to his website, cash it. No specific time for that, just whenever you do it, right?
We do it normally. Yeah, we do a pre-recorded thing, so it's not live, and then I upload it probably the same day or the next day, but we do it in the afternoons, and then I do the Hoax Busters Call on Monday at 9 Eastern time, around that time.
Okay.
And that is live on TalkShoe, and you can call in on that, and there's information at the top of hoaxbusterscall.com on how to do that if you're interested.
Terrific. And you do solicit donations or anything for your work, or?
I just have a donation button on the blog. Yeah, I don't have any ads. I don't have to put any ads on my videos. I just leave it up to people if they feel like helping out, then and yeah, so I'll gladly accept it and thank them for it, and yeah, it all helps out. Different little expenses that go on,
Sure, certainly,
trying
yeah.
to do all this, and yeah. So that's pretty much the summation of it. As far as it's all there, kind of at one centralized point at the hoaxbusterscall.com. All links to everything.
Okay, great, terrific. Listen, I'll let you go then, and good night, and maybe we'll talk again soon.
Yeah, a good conversation, man. I really enjoyed it. I appreciate it, and thanks.
Good night.
Okay, take care.